mic cord. Good morning. Thanks, everyone, for coming, and thanks for having me here in this beautiful space. Oh, I think I have a... That one's for that. Thanks. Okay, now can you hear me? I was excited to hear about your topic of invest, and I knew immediately that would fit perfectly with what I wanted to talk to you about. And so what I want to talk to you about is investing in your business. How do I get this to you? Oh, here. Okay. By investing in the infrastructure of your business. And I know infrastructure seems like a strange word for documents, but but first let's talk about me. Sorry. I'm an attorney of Stock Legal, but before this, I was self-employed for 10 years. I had my own law firm, and I had to deal with clients telling me that my services were too expensive, or that they hired me to do something, but then decided later they weren't going to use that, so maybe didn't need to pay for it, or changed their mind midstream, or had a hard time understanding how what I was going to do for them was going to be an investment in their business. Like when you create graphics or branding information for a client, that's an investment in their business. I am so excited about this group, finding that there are creatives in all fields, because I like to think of myself as creative too. Not just that, I am creative, but in my work as an attorney, and I also enjoy writing flash fiction, and I do that. There's a contest I started doing last year where you have to write a 1,000-word story in 48 hours. And so Friday night at midnight, you'll get like a scene, a genre, and like an object that all have to appear in the story, and then you have 48 hours to do it. But what I didn't realize till afterwards is how much that would improve my drafting of agreements, because when you only have 1,000 words to tell a story, you use your words carefully, and you get rid of a lot of the bulky phrases. And then I started doing that with my contracts. I was already doing that a little bit, but it just upped my game. I enjoy being a volunteer for Volunteer Lawyers and Accountants for the Arts. And if that's an organization that any of you aren't aware of, you should get to know the organization. And they have both accountancy and attorneys. And we give talks and have sessions, educational sessions, and do work for clients that come to us through VLAA. And Sue Greenberg, right over here, is the executive director of that organization. The other key thing about my background is that I started in litigation, which is where businesses are suing each other because of a disagreement. And once you deal with those arguments on that end, and you realize how much of this could have been prevented up front if people had better understood, maybe there were two different understandings from the start and they just never realized it. Maybe after they got like partway through, there was a change or whatever wanted to happen, and they didn't have a mechanism to deal with that worked out. So I loved trying cases. I loved being in courtrooms. I loved arguing to juries. It was a lot about my ego and me enjoying that. And it was, even when my clients won, it cost them money and it wasn't fun for them. And so I decided I wanted to help my clients avoid courtrooms and use my services for that. I love helping people establish and grow their business. My favorite thing is to watch one of my clients' businesses really grow and take off and watch that mature. And I say, getting back to the point of this, you start by building, for any business structure to grow, you have to have a strong infrastructure, which is like the foundation that you build upon. So I'm hoping today I can get you all focused and thinking on that and thinking how you can use some of these ideas to help build your infrastructure and invest in that. Okay. Now, the space bar does it too. Thank you. Okay. So now, why the word infrastructure? And just to take us back to one of our all-time favorite books, the Oxford English Dictionary. And I know you're there with me because there's nothing like sinking into that thing. which defines it as the basic physical and organizational structures and facilities. Now, of course, they're thinking of buildings and roads and power supplies needed for operation or society or expertise. But we all know that art and design is just as important to all of that as the structures and the facilities, that the aesthetics of it kind of create the surroundings. And so that is the infrastructure of your business. And you've heard two different words, agreements and contracts. They're the same thing. I like to use the word agreement because it's about people agreeing. I think the word contract just sounds more contentious. So I like to call them agreements. And you'll see halfway through here, like my slides will kind of change. And I'll talk about contracts in one context and agreements in another. But it's the same thing. Infrastructure is where you want to invest. It's the foundation. Everything else is built on that. And so this is the same point I've been making. And if you're not willing to invest in your business, why would anyone else? And that's the issue I always have with clients who didn't want to pay for my services. It's like, if you're not willing to pay to put money into this business this way, why would a client want to come to you and give you money? Or why would a lender want to lend you money? Okay, now we're still talking about contracts because we're talking about the kind of things other people write, not me. And this is what a lot of people think when they think about contracts, that there's legalese. And I even brought, where's it? Okay, so here's one phrase from a contract. Now, therefore, in consideration of the foregoing and the mutual promises herein contained, the parties hereby agree as follows. I would write that as, the parties agree, and then list the things. You can change those things, Contracts can be contentious. People think of them as like, oh, now we got to go. Like, we want to make the deal. We'll just let our lawyers, deal with the negotiations for the contract or whatever. They don't have to be contentious. If you're at an agreement and you both agree to the same thing, all the contract is putting that on paper. That shouldn't be a contentious part of it. Where the contention comes up is where there are things that you both took for granted, but you never communicated about. And really, you want that communication up front, not in the middle of your working relationship, and certainly not at the end of your working relationship, when then you're trying to get paid. Another issue a lot of times that people think, and especially freelancers or people starting out or that are solo shops or even small groups, they think that they have no leverage. The other side, what's the point of even trying to negotiate? They have all the power. I need this job, I'm going to take it. But you always have more leverage than you think, and you've probably gone out and had coffee or a drink with a friend of yours that's dealing with something and pointed out to them all the places they have more power than they realize, but it's hard to do for yourself. And this is where I think working with a good attorney or having a good network can help you. You always have more people. You want people coming to you for your expertise and what you're doing, not just because you're the cheapest person in town. You'll never build a business that way. So if they're coming because they want your work, you've got leverage. And the other thing is contracts are a little off-putting. Sometimes people don't want to deal with it. We're just friends, let's shake on it. And I will tell you from my own personal experience and the experience of many of my clients, the one time you don't put a contract down, the one time you're dealing with a friend or a cousin or a friend of a friend, that's the one that blows up every time. It's the ones where you think you don't need a contract is where you need it the most. All right. Okay, again, the contracts, here's the alternative to what it can be. They don't have to be legalese. They can be written in simple language. They don't have to be confusing. They can actually be clarifying and clarify what you mean. They don't have to be contentious. They can be a tool to help communication and gotchas. Sometimes people are always thinking, and there are some business people out there that you don't want to be doing business with that think that they can trick you by having one clause in the contract that little did you know this was there. They don't have to have that, and you don't want that. It can, instead of hiding things, it can actually illuminate things and explain what's going to happen. They don't have to be one-sided. Agreements can actually level the disparities in the playing field. And some people think of them as deal killers, but really it can be a marketing tool. Your contract can be a place where that sells your services. It doesn't detract people from them, but actually sells them. And that's why, and this is the biggest thing, and we'll get to it more, but And I know when everyone's starting out, you have to prioritize and invest in your business and use your money judiciously. And so sometimes we look for contracts online, or we pull things off, I don't know, LegalZoom, or you just Google and you find something like, oh, this looks good. Or you're like, oh, you know what? I did a freelance project for another company that did that used, let me look at theirs and I'll just like change a few words and it'll work for me. If the more specific a contract is to what you're doing and how you're doing your work, the better marketing tool it's going to be and the better it's going to protect you, which we'll get to. Okay, and so here, I like to call this, now this here again is where I use agreement, but conscious contracting has a little more alliteration. And I like to call this the spirituality of contracts, which I know you all are very excited about. And one of the reasons you didn't realize this was going to be a spiritual morning. But the first thing I'm talking about is business karma. I believe in business karma, you know? And this is what gets me through the night sometimes when I see someone do something that I'm like, how are they getting away with that? And now they're even getting more work. I have to trust that the universe will take care of that person. And it's not my job to go out and personally, you know, make sure that karma comes up for them. But eventually things, you know, people learn of your reputation. People decide they don't want to work with people. And so it's this, you don't want to have, I don't know, I never wanted contention with me and my clients. I don't mind if I'm arguing for my clients, for someone else in contention, but I never wanted it in the client relationship. And so this helps keep that tension out of your client relationship. Again, they can make things even-handed, easily understood. You can, when you're crafting your own contracts, you can put like examples in there, or hypotheticals in there. You want to be careful when you do that you're not saying, oh, it's always going to be like this. And that's why you always want someone looking at what you've written. And again, it can be a marketing tool. In writing, you can explain why you do things a certain way and how your process helps your clients. And one thing I think about this, I don't know if any of you work, and I think I have more about this in later, have contracts that have like a kill fee, which is if someone has hired you and then changes their mind, you get a certain percentage of what you would have gotten anyway. And that helps small businesses because if you've taken on a big project with like multiple phases, you usually have stopped for a while marketing to get more work because you know you're going to be busy. Maybe you've turned down projects. And then the client that you had that long, complicated project for suddenly goes out of business or something happens. And now you're left unexpectedly without anything coming in. And people have a hard time putting that in their contracts because they think it's such a hard sell. And that's the kind of thing, the way you write it in there is you can write it like, because you will get my undivided attention when I am working on your project, or you will get, you know, I will not accept other work that will make it difficult for me to work on your project or that will keep me up. And in exchange for that, you know, I need to get, if anything happens and this doesn't go to fruition, well, okay, that's not a simple word, but 25 to 50% of what the contract fee would have been to protect my business. And there's always a way to sell something. And I don't mean in a shady, like there are ways to spin things, but you can always explain it in a way how it benefits both of you, because really everything you're doing is, the stronger your business is, the better you're going to be able to work for this company. Does that make sense?
I feel like doing that also lets you know how committed they are.
Yes, that's true. Then you can weed people out up front. If they're already, because a lot of times they're already thinking, well, if it doesn't work, we'll just cut and run and watch them try and come after us, you know? And so you want to weed those people out. That's an excellent point. Weed those clients out up front. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about like where right now, if you're not working with an attorney and having someone help you with your agreements, where they might be coming from. Maybe you're creating them. Maybe you're using the client's standard boilerplate contract. Here's where I have my warning that boilerplates can burn. Because in the client's contract, that's going to be written completely one-sided for your client, I guarantee you. Maybe you pull something off the internet or you recycle from another business. Or, of course, you know, this is the best choice. You work with a trusted attorney, build custom agreements tailored to the way you work, that you understand, to protect your business, and that build trust and loyalty with your clients. Now, think about what you want in your client agreements. What are the most important things to you in your business? For most of you, if you're creating or designing something, the most important thing, the most valuable thing you're creating for your client, whether it's like a logo or branding or something like that, it's going to be intellectual property. So I have IP in there, that's what it stands for. And at what point does it transfer? And who owns that? So when you create it, you own it. And at some point over the course of the relationship, you either give it to your client or you license it to your client. And depending on what it is, it may be something you want to give, it may be something you want to license. If you license it, you continue to own it and can still use it. So you want that to be covered. That has to be clear. What services are you going to perform? You want that to be spelled out clearly, because I don't know if any of you are familiar with something I like to call scope creep. It's when you think you've spelled out what you're going to do, and the client has a different idea about what's included in that. And then suddenly there's, I didn't think there'd be an extra charge for that. If you lay it out in your contract and you have what's going to happen for anything outside of that laid out, that's because a lot of people lay it out, but they don't have the phrase to catch everything else, like the net below. So you can have this is all done for this fee that I've quoted. Any additional work or work outside the scope will be done at our regular hourly rate of X. And then when something comes, the client asks you for something outside of that, you can say, oh, I'd love to do that. As you recall, that's outside the scope, and that would be at our regularly hourly rate. I just want to confirm, before we go on. And then they'll, sure, of course, I remember the contract, the agreement. But you also want it clearly laid out, the fees that are to be paid and risks that are going to be split. Now, this is another thing with my background was a lot in risk management too, and helping businesses figure out there's nothing without risk. Anytime you go into business or start a deal with a client or anything, there's always going to be some risk. There's no way you can eliminate all of it, but you can strategize it. So let's say, the equipment, something happens with equipment or something like that, or even, I don't know, if you've got a freelancer coming in or an independent contractor coming in to help you with the project, things like that. There are all ways different things can happen and things can come up. And a lot of clients, if you're doing any work on their site or if you're having they'll have their standard contracts or their requests for proposals for bids will have language in them that require you to purchase insurance, things like that. Or to be liable, because we'll get to liability and indemnification, which is another word. Indemnification means that you take on the liability for someone else. Does everyone know what I mean when I say liability for things? Okay. So you want to make sure that you're dealing with that risk appropriately. A lot of times these are written kind of one-sided, where you take on some of theirs, but they never take on any of yours. And you want to watch for that. And sometimes if you're taking on extra liability, you can get insurance or something else to protect you from that doesn't cost that much more than what you already have. So let's say for a client job, for the way they want something, you have to invest in a new printer or a new, something to complete that job. And then that's expensive equipment you have to buy, and then something happens to it, or I don't know. I'm just off the top of my head trying to come up with examples. But that you can put in there that they're responsible for the warranty on that, or they're responsible for replacing that. There are all different ways that can be dealt with, and that's just a minor example, but there are things that can be done. The more you anticipate things and address them ahead of time, the easier it is, because a lot of times you can put things like that in a contract and people are thinking, well, they just glide over it because it's not going to, no one thinks those things are going to happen, and then something happens and you've already got it covered. Okay, so building your perfect services agreement, of course, would be a win-win for you and your client. And in thinking about it, where would you start? Well, first I would think of your wish list. Think about it in your dream. How would everything happen? Would you get paid weekly? Would you get paid at the end of each phase? Let's say you're doing 3 different things for the client. You're designing a logo, developing branding, and then making a website for them? Like, are you going to get paid at each phase, or are they paying you a set fee and you'll get a weekly check? Like, however you would want that to happen, first come up with your wish list. Then prioritize what's more important to you. Of all the things on your wish list, which ones are most important? What deal killers are there? Is there anything out there that would make this, like, I will not work with this client? Think about those things. What risk are you comfortable with? Is there a certain amount of risk that you're willing to take and some that you aren't? And then think about, if you're adding risk, how can you add and where can you add protection? And then of these, like, where are you willing to compromise? But a lot of times you start talking before you think about this. And then as you're talking, you find yourself agreeing to things. And then later you're like, wait a minute, how am I going to walk that back? So just before you get in that situation, sit down and think about it. And what I like to do with my clients is we have some, for the things they do on a regular basis, we have the working agreements that we've come up with that we use. But sometimes there are clients that will want things a little differently that they want to do. So then we'll have some like parts that kind of plug in different areas. And then sometimes there's just something they're willing to do with one particular client or when things going differently, but we've got that base structure. And I like to spend a lot of time with my clients so they completely understand their whole contract. And I think when I say me, I think I'm not, most lawyers are like this. You can find lawyers that do this. You know, if you're talking to one and you're not, it may take a little time interviewing them and sitting down with them, but you want to find someone that you have a good fit. You always want to find someone that you could easily call up and say, I think I screwed up. You know, that you're comfortable doing that with, that can say, okay, here's how we're going to fix it. That's when I'm working with accountants, that's what I look for. Someone where I can say, look, I think I messed this up. Can you help me fix it? And someone that'll help me explain things to me up front to prevent that from happening, but sometimes it still does. Okay. Again, really, an agreement protects both parties. It can clearly identify the deliverables and tie them to a payment schedule, because you don't want to wait and just get paid at the end. You want payment along the way. And again, that shows the client commitment. You can catch things sooner. If they were always on top of things and they start getting a little behind, it's something going on with their business. Did the person I'm working with, did that change? Is something you can address things. The intellectual property you create. Who owns it? If it's changing hands, when does this happen? Because again, this is the most leverage you have. That's the most important thing you're creating. You can license it to them for the course of your working with them and not have it change hands until you're paid in full. And then, of course, that's different than the things that you want to hang on to. If you're creating something, let's say you're putting together material or something for this client, but you'll also be using it for other clients, maybe that wouldn't be branding, but some other kind of information, some content maybe that you can then tweak and use for other clients, then you want to hang on to that and just license to this client. And so you want to figure that out, and you want that carefully spelled out in your agreement. And again, you want to carefully define the scope and watch out for the scope creep that we talked about. And you want to protect your timeline schedule. So here's another thing that I've seen come up with clients that do this kind of work, is that they put together a deliverable, they give it to the client, and then the client is supposed to get it back to them within like 48 hours, and then they have another deadline. If the client keeps it for a week, you shouldn't be expected to then keep the deadline you put in place thinking you'd have a week to do it. So you want your deadlines to be 10 days after returning, approval from client to go ahead, not an actual date. So there are things like that you want to put in there. And then we talked about this, the kill fees and opportunity costs is something that you can put in there, and it can protect you both, because if something comes up, otherwise you might be in a situation where you had to take on other work at the last minute, or the client would be struggling because you've taken on too many projects because you weren't sure you needed to, because you weren't sure otherwise you were going to get enough coming in that month. So that is how that can help both of you. And okay, there are times when the client will insist on using its own contract or proposal, but that doesn't mean we're done. We can still change that. And so you also want to carefully look at it and have a review of that before you quote a price, because there might be things in there that are hidden costs for you. Maybe it requires you to travel. Let's say the client's in Boston, and it requires you to travel there for 4 meetings. And you're thinking you can do that on the phone, or clearly they're going to pay for your travel. Well, we want to put that in the contract up front. You can still negotiate these terms. You can still watch for terms that are completely unreasonable. And we talk about indemnity and subrogation language. So that is if, I don't know, let's say you're helping a bank with its branding and with its website, and then there's some data breach and their client's information gets taken, and then that somehow something in the contract says that you're liable for anything that comes out of the website, even though what you created for the website had nothing to do with the part of the website where data was taken. So you always want to watch out for those things and make sure that that's, or let's say you didn't even agree to that, but the client figures out you designed the website, the client's customers, and sues you. And now, even though you're not on the hook for it, you have to hire a lawyer to defend yourself and get in there, and that's going to be money up front. But if you have indemnity language that they have to defend you right off the bat, then they're going to do it. Or if you have insurance, if you couldn't negotiate that away, but you built into the price the extra $1,000 it costs you to get an insurance policy for this, then your insurance covers it. So those are the things you want to go through first before you quote a price on that. You want to see their whole contract and what's in there. And again, watch out in those contracts for intellectual property ownership, because a lot of contracts have work for hire clauses, which means the minute you start doing work for them, they own your intellectual property usually. So you want to make sure to protect anything you're doing and carve it out from that. Again, insurance obligations, if they require you to have work comp insurance for any independent contractor you hire or whatever, you just want to make sure either they drop that or that you build that into your price. And a lot of these have clauses that I think people just glide right over and don't think about, but it's the rights that you give up. A lot of times they'll say you waive your right to jury trial. You agree to mandatory arbitration. You agree to mandatory arbitration in Boston, and then it's even if they don't pay your bill and you just want to get your bill paid, now you've agreed that you have to fly to Boston and sue them to do that, or hire an attorney in Boston. And a lot of times they'll have agreements that say, if we prevail, you will pay our attorney's fees, but it doesn't go both ways. And it's one thing if they know that if you have to sue them to get paid, they're going to have to pay back your attorneys. That does a lot to get people not to skip that final payment they owe you. Okay, so to come up with an agreement for you and your client to be officially, a contract, you need a meeting of the minds, which again is an agreement between the parties. And an agreement is a mutual understanding about rights and responsibilities. So you want to make sure you both have the same understanding. And you need offer and acceptance. And offer and acceptance is, I offer to make this logo for you. And you're like, thank you, we want you to. Here's money for that. And the money is consideration. That you're each getting something of value. You're getting money, they're getting your work product. So that's what you would need for actually something to hold up. But what you want is more than that. You want clear expectations. You want a way to deal with this disputes. So a lot of times in your agreements, you can say, you don't want to get a nasty letter, or if there's a disagreement, the first thing is that we call each other and try and talk it out. And then if that doesn't work, maybe we go to mediation before anyone goes to court. And hopefully none of you have ever had to go to court over contract or terms. But if you have these steps in there on the way, it just helps prevent things from falling through the cracks, and it prevents things from escalating too quickly. You want to distribute the risk. So, and that's another thing, like the kill fee example. I mean, if they can cut and run at any time, really, then you've got all the risk and they don't have it. And with that kill fee, at least, then they have some risk of not going through. There are other ways to do that. That's just a quick example. You want communication. You want to be talking to your client. You want to build a relationship with them because you want them to give you more business and refer other clients to you. You want timely payment, You want to know when that check's coming so that you can deposit it into your account and you can keep your business expenses and pay yourself and pay your people and pay your rent and for everything else you have. And you really want a happy client, again, so that they will give you more work and refer others to you. And here, this is why connecting with a lawyer can be a good thing to do. And again, this is, I think, investing. And not just to help you with your clients. Anytime you're starting a new business venture, you want to have like your team of advisors. You want an accountant, you want a lawyer. And if you build a relationship with a lawyer that you work with over time, the more that lawyer understands your business, the better and more quickly they can protect you. And they save you money in the long run. And again, this is why it's an investment. You're paying to have, your basic agreements made up front, but that's money that you'll keep using those agreements. You don't need a new one every time. And the more, again, that the lawyer knows your business and knows how you work, if something happens, you can call them. And they don't have to learn everything, and you don't have to go in and get the meeting, they already know that, so they can answer you more quickly and get back to you and tell you, okay, here's how I think we should handle this. So one way I've worked with clients too, who just is by just talking to my client, they're negotiating with their client, and I'm helping them kind of behind the scenes. Like, we've gotten a copy of the client's bid for proposal or standard contract, and I'm telling my client, this is why this is important to you. This is like, what are your biggest priorities here? Like, here are 5 things that we disagree with that we're going to try and negotiate. Which ones are most important? This is why I think those are most important. And here's talking points. And sometimes I'll ghost write emails for clients because you don't want to always then enter a lawyer in and escalate things. You still want to keep that communication between the clients so we can work behind the scenes like that. You'll not be leaving money on the table because you'll understand when you have intellectual property that you want to hang on to and can be used again, or that you put in the kill fee, or there's something else. There are other ways that you can, or maybe you write the contract, so these are my fees, but then these are additional costs associated with the project. And then the client pays for any unexpected cost because it comes out of a different category and your fee's still the same. And lawyers you can be better prepared for the unexpected. And again, if something comes up, you can hit the ground running. How to find a lawyer like that to work with. So talk to colleagues, talk to your people that do similar things that you do, find out who they like and use, referrals from volunteer lawyers and accountants for the arts. Great place to start, the Missouri Bar. You can look online. What to expect. So I think so many people are scared to even call a lawyer because they're afraid the minute they pick up that phone, there's some kind of meter running. Almost all lawyers, and don't work with one that won't, will talk to you for at least a half an hour of no charge to get an idea, like a meet and greet kind of thing, to get an idea of what your needs are and what kind of services they offer and how it will work. And it's not just, don't just call and ask for the hourly rates. It's not just about that, because a lot of times even lawyers with higher hourly rates will do things on a flat fee for you that work for you. And sometimes if it's a higher hourly rate, the lawyer's got more experience and they're going to know they've done more of this in the past, so they're going to be able to do it more quickly. You may be paying a higher hourly rate for half an hour than you would for a cheaper lawyer spending 3 hours on something. Tell your lawyer your budget. Be upfront with them. Say, look, I've got, $1,500 to spend. I need 5 things. I've got $500 to spend. I need 2 things. Whatever it is, the lawyer can say, okay, let's think about the best way to prioritize and do this with you. And okay, let's do this now. But before you get the next big project, we want to do X. Let's have a plan for getting the other things you need in place. Because when you're starting out, or at any point, I understand from having my own business. You can't do everything you want to at once, You have to prioritize. So we've come to the end. I just then want to end with an ongoing relationship and customized agreements, but just the most important takeaway are the things you want in that infrastructure. And I wanted to thank you for coming and having me speak to you in this beautiful space. And then I think we wanted to open it up for any questions. Thank you.